Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by posting on the bulletin board in Village Hall, by mail to the Ridgewood News, the Record, and by submission to all persons entitled to the same as provided by law of a schedule, including the date and time of this meeting. Roll call, please.
Councilwoman Houck is absent. Councilman Pucciarelli?
Here.
Councilman Ritchie?
Here.
Councilwoman Walsh is absent. And Mayor Aronson?
Here. Please join us as we salute the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please join us now in a moment of silence as we honor the American men and women serving in the armed forces, as well as those serving as first responders. Great, thank you. Good evening, welcome everybody. We have our budget discussion tonight, but before we do that, we'll take comments from the public. Anyone have a question, comment, suggestion? I see one member of the public here. All right, what we'll do now is we'll turn this over to our village manager, Roberta Sonnenfeld, to lead us through the budget. And just to sort of throw it out there, so we're going to have a discussion tonight. Obviously, the full council's not here. We're going to be meeting again on Monday night to come to the decision as to what to introduce on Wednesday. So this is part one of this discussion.
And Monday is at 6:30 p.m. in this room, most likely.
6:30. Right. Thanks.
Okay, we're ready? Okay. To get started, I just want to emphasize a couple of things. This is not the introduction of the budget. And at this point in the process, normally, we have a lot less information than this. So this is a little more than normal. And we still have some numbers that we need to look at. So I would make 3 points. It's preliminary. It's a culmination of the budget discussions to date. Those have been between us and the department heads. It's been between the council and the department heads. And we still have some adjustments that could be made to this. It's a lot of information that I'm going to be throwing at all of us tonight. And so therefore it's the beginning of the decision phase of the budget. And with that, I would invite the public, that would be NAC, I guess, to engage in this conversation with us. Okay, so, and as we mentioned, the next meeting will be Monday evening. The third thing I would say is not only is this a start of the decision process and decision phase of this budget, it's also the start of a longer-term conversation and longer-term plans for how we want to strategize and how we want to deliver government services going forward. So with that, okay, just to get ourselves situated, the budget process to date. The council directive was to come up with a 0% tax increase, to come up with a $3 million capital budget. We have completed at least 2 rounds of budget reviews. We've had some more with some of the departments. The departmental reviews have been held with the council over the last 3 weeks. And based on those departmental reviews and conversations, we've applied some further adjustments to the numbers. We have, in general, we've maxed out anticipated revenue. Okay, so we have gone to, in many cases, the revenue as it was realized in 2013. Sometimes we give ourselves some room. Here we did not give ourselves much room. We also looked at 2013 actuals as a guideline for expenses. Sometimes we go budget to budget. We were looking actual 2013 to budget. And we assumed that we would not change or diminish any services to our customers, to our residents. Okay?
Roberta, can I just point out for the benefit of the public who may be watching, well, 2 of them and Mac, that when you say we maxed out anticipated revenue, I think it's important to distinguish from the private sector where you can anticipate revenue that you've never seen before, but in the public sector you can only budget revenue that you had realized in the prior year, you know, with some exceptions where it's very likely to come in, et cetera. But that is something that I think comes as a surprise to people not used to the public sector.
And we actually have one case where we can do that, and we'll talk about that later. So, as far as looking at expenses that need to be covered, and these are supplemental expenses over and above the 2013 budget. So this is the stuff that we would need to fund upfront. I mean, so this is over and above the 2013 budget, okay? So in 2013, we took one-time revenue and fund balance, and I'll talk about that in a little while, of $3,827,000. So that means that we have to figure out how we're going to address that in this budget year. We had and I'll take you through the increase in debt service. We have an increase in debt service year over year of $835,000. That is another item that we have to deal with. We have contractual salary increases of $213,000, health insurance increases of $321,000, terminal leave increase. So this is terminal leave over and above what we paid out in 2013.
And this is terminal leave that's anticipated for this year. It's not
This is terminal leave that we are sure of this year.
that we're sure of. And just so we're clear, this is not establishing a reserve against that accrual, that unfunded liability that we know is out there. There's a lot of talk in town about that $6.4 million.
Yeah, so we're going to go into that later. We have an unfunded liabilities
Yeah.
chart, and we'll talk to that because I
Okay,
thought
but
it was important.
this is actually anticipated.
This is 101,000 over last year. It's about 400,000.
Over last year,
total.
right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So here we're talking about the differences year over year that we have to fund even before we do other
Understand.
things,
Yeah,
right?
it's the delta.
Incremental snow removal cost this year was $365,000. We have to cover that as well. That's what we've already spent. Seasonal staff, which was a grant last year that we used in two of our areas, was about $118,000, and we used them to do work that needs to get done. Elections is $50,000 more this year that we have to fund because of the extra election. Salary raises for non-union and management staff is in here. 2 new police officers. This includes salary, benefits, uniforms, and training. Okay, so that's the $80,000. And grass disposal, one of my favorites, is $35,000 because we just have to segregate the grass, and it's more expensive to dump. So these are expenses that need to be covered because they're contractual in nature, except for maybe the salary raises, which we could discuss, but it's my strong recommendation that we go with that. The supplemental expenses that are in the budget right now that I believe should be covered are the police vehicles that you heard about in the departmental reviews, the $100,000. The Board of Adjustment support for $33,000, an added number for snow removal for this year, for November, December, $40,000. That would cover one snowstorm. A person in information technology, this would be an added part-timer. There's one Dylan. I've called this the Dylanette, but there's a lot of complaints, and Dylan can't be all over the place. And we're not really leveraging technology. We're not even leveraging Microsoft Office or Outlook or any of those things. And the e-ticket system, which will go online this year. So that's another $223,000 of incremental expense over 2013. Okay. From the revenue perspective, we have some risks, and I think we have some opportunities. Parking tickets could be a risk because we haven't had the staffing for parking tickets. The usual grade and risk I hear, weather-related. We have some risk in recycling revenue because of the tougher standards and potentially lower prices. And we have a risk, and this could be a little confusing, but to the extent that we've estimated revenues closer to their 2013 actual, when we replenish fund balance next year, there's a risk that we replenish it at the same amount. Do we have that? Yeah, because it took me a while to kind of learn that. On the opportunity side, we have a full-year impact of the increased side job fees. We think that could be an additional $200,000 over 2013. This is one of the areas, Albert, that we can certify, and we can put in the numbers. So one of the few. Do you want to say anything?
Thank you.
Okay. And building permits, which are on target year-to-date, there's a potential, given the economy and stuff, that maybe we would be a little higher in building permits, but we're not saying that as yet. Well, this is an eye chart, huh? So on the sources of funds, in order to get, again, to the zero that was the target, we would, as we have done in years prior, use some of the fund balance. Now, the fund balance is replenished, and you can see this going from 2013 to 2014, right? In 2013, the fund balance was $4,300,000. In 2014, we more than made up what we took out of it. So it's replenished every year by the revenues that are over anticipated revenues, actual revenues. It's added to by expenses that are under budgeted expenses. So what we're suggesting here is utilizing $3.1 million of that surplus balance, leaving a remaining balance of $1.3 million, which is comparative to the previous years. And actually, in 2010, we almost used the entire surplus. So this kind of gives you a little history. We have a recycling fund, which has about $600,000. It had about $600,000 in it. We took about $300,000 of that for allocation against budget items, and we took another $150,000 to offset the tax levy, again, to get to that zero. So that fund would be at zero at the end of this budget. And needless to say, we hit the snow removal trust for the entire $211,000 that was in it. So, if you look at one-time revenues, in addition to the fund balance, we have, as we mentioned, the recycling trust fund. We have a reserve from FEMA that we're planning on using. We have the Green Acres grant. We have reserve for debt service. And you'll notice that there's a 2012-2011, two line items that represent the parking facility. And what this represents, and it's a little confusing, but what this represents is that the village in 2011 and 2012 moved money to make up for a deficit in the parking utility, right? So the parking utility is now paying the village back after its, needless to say, banner year last year of coming up with, $400,000 more revenue because we didn't have the theft going on. So that's the 249 and the 148. I think we're very sure of the 249. We still need, unless you got it, did you get confirmation on the use of the 148? Okay. So that's $1,343,000 in total one-time revenue. In 2013, the associated number was $878,000. Okay. I just wanted to mention a little bit about debt service because it's such a big increase year over year. So the outstanding principal and interest payments on debt is $4.8 million. That is $835,000 above 2013 that we have to find the money to offset. We have offset some of it by that Green Acres grant that I mentioned earlier, a FEMA reserve, and the open space tax levy. I think one of the things that we have to think about, or we have to look at, and we'll work with the FAC on this as well, and the FAC has mentioned this, the Finance Advisory Committee, is we really need long-range budget forecasting and debt planning. Right?
May I ask, is most of that debt service increase due to principal increase, I assume, because we had a pretty good interest rate deal that I recall from last year.
The large increase is from the 2013 bond sale that we had, so there's a $600,000 new principal payment in this year's budget for that. That's part of it.
Well, better that than just interest. So.
True. Okay. So just to summarize the previous couple of slides, the supplemental expenses, including the MUS and the shoulds that we think we should do is about $5,995,000, $830 that we have to figure out how to fund. And the three areas of funding that we're talking about are fund balance, one-time revenue, budget allocations, which brings us to $4.9 million, which offsets up to $1 million of the total increase in expenses. And I just want to add here that this number, this $4,957,000, which looks large, honestly, is approximately $1 million incremental to 2013. So we're not looking at a $5 million difference between 2014 and 2013. We're looking at $1 million, about. And again, I want to say this is preliminary. This could move a little, right?
And how much of that was due to the snow removal? And I know we talked about the extraordinary expenses that the weather incurred.
Yeah, so we said snow removal was $365,000. The increase in debt service was $835,000. And contractual stuff between salary and insurance and terminal leave was another $600,000. So that's, and those are all things that we have to cover. We don't have a choice.
So in other words, just to restate that again, so in terms of salary obligations, health insurance, terminal leave, those kinds of contractual obligations, that's a $600,000 number we start off in the hole. Add to that snow removal is another $300,000.
Yeah, the obligation number is about $5.96 million in total. The additional request is for $223,000.
Right.
Okay, yeah. So here's the preliminary budget, based on, again, coming up to zero and based on all of the sources and uses of funds that I spoke about. So this budget gets us to a $30.9 million amount to be raised by taxation, which on the average assessed value of a Ridgewood home would be a decrease of $5 a year in taxes. So it's flat. Okay, any questions on that?
Yeah, I do have a question. Let's just back up for a minute. So,
Okay.
Unless I misunderstood, I think what you said was, right now, we've got $1,037,000 of unfunded expenses versus funds to be raised.
They're unfunded by one-time events.
Right. So we're $1 million short, for lack of a better phrase, correct?
But we're funding them, and we have to kind of come up with this number, and again, it's preliminary. We're funding them through revenue increases and expense decreases in the budget.
Okay.
That's how that's how we're at zero.
Okay.
Yeah?
Now, so in terms of the one item on the anticipated revenue, the FEMA reserve, is that money that's in-house, that 452, or is that anticipated?
We have it,
We have that.
yes.
So what, if any, FEMA money is in the budget that we were anticipating?
300,000. The 300,000, I guess I didn't mention this, but we're anticipating on, if you look at, I guess it's slide 6, one of the reasons, and I should thank you for pointing this out, the utilized surplus that we're recommending in 2014 is $3.1 million. The assumption there is $300,000 is coming in from FEMA, and we're assured that that's the case.
Which slide is it? I'm sorry, we
That's
don't have
slide
numbers.
6, sources of funds, use of surplus and trust funds. I'll try to go back.
Okay.
This slide up here, this is the slide. Right, remember we said that we're going $100,000, kind of lower in remaining surplus for 2014 in this fund balance account. The reason we feel comfortable with that is that we have $300,000 that we will apply to this account coming in from FEMA, and that's the funds that are not yet in-house.
So that's not reflected, that $300,000 is not yet reflected in this budget.
No.
It's a very similar situation as to last year, where we anticipated more in fund balance, and we received FEMA money during the year to replenish the fund
So
balance.
but it's not reflected, just,
No.
it's right, okay.
No, it's not reflected.
Right.
But it's reflected in our decision to go to the 3.1.
It's based on an approved PW by FEMA, so it's basically approved. It's just a matter of time of getting the funds in, so it could be another 2 or 3 months, who knows?
Okay.
Okay, so there's a discussion to be had about utilizing what is about $5 million of fund balances and the other associated one-time revenues and allocations. Again, I want to emphasize that this $5 million is not a change. It is $1 million of added risk over what we did last year, and a trend that we've been doing, right, you would say, Steve, over the last couple of years. All right. So I guess, one possibility is, in fact, partially funding by tax increases. And so if we were to raise taxes 0.5%, that would equate to $22 per resident per year, which is less than $2 a month. And we would raise $225,000 doing that. If we went to 1%, it would be $50 per resident, and we would raise $450,000 doing that. So I again want to emphasize that the next thing we will do, and it should have been on the slide, is we're going to go back one more time to look at expense and revenue and see if there's any other expense savings or revenue enhancements that we can make. And we will do that prior to Monday. Okay?
Question if I could.
Yeah.
And the number in here for capital debt service is in the debt service number? Including
And then there's also a line in this budget to be introduced, $140,000 for capital improvement fund money. It's at the same level as 2013, so then you can issue
in here.
$2.8 million, so your budget will come out to $3 million, what we've been targeting for.
Yeah, we have a capital page right at the end that talks to this a little bit.
Roberta, when we listen to some of the department heads with their requests, and I'm talking specifically about some of the capital requests, I felt there were some compelling arguments for some of the things. I think Frank talked about this multi-use truck that was going to eliminate 3 trucks. I think it was about $100,000 and so forth. So maybe between now and when we finalize this thing, if you had your choice to pick a couple of those, what you think are really important items, and I think some of those rose to the top when we listened.
Yeah.
Could we fund them with 0.5% or 1%, and would that make sense? Because it seems year after year we just keep putting off the inevitable, and then we end up spending, all this money on transmissions that are 25 years old, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. So.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the initial request coming in, it was double this amount. So that kind of supports looking at that more. The other thing that Steve is doing is we're trying to clean up, I guess that's the right word.
Canceling out old
capital
projects and reappropriating the funds for new projects.
And there's some money there.
Okay, good. Yeah.
So,
Actually, related to that point, if possible, the $3 million that you've hit now, and I guess we'll get to in a minute, but if you could give us before Monday sort of the list. I know we went through a list of items. I don't know if all of those that we discussed with your department heads.
Right. And we've been focusing, honestly, in the last, 5 business days on the expense side.
Right.
So we will, and we've been talking some capital with some folks, like lighting and things like that, but we have, and like the library capital request for a generator.
Yeah. And also, too, we're not talking about the water utility here at this particular moment, but...
We're not talking about the water utility, right.
However, there was a project going on in terms of selling off some of the properties that the water utility owned, and I don't know whatever happened to that project. It just kind of stopped. I know that there was some consulting, was there some consulting contracts that were put out in terms of...
That's correct. There was Councilman, there was a bond ordinance, capital ordinance introduced and adopted last year for that project.
Right.
It was about $80,000. So I can inquire with
I'm not sure
them.
where that project went in terms of, would that bring some revenue into the water utility and so forth? It's just off the subject.
Yeah, honestly, Frank and I have not discussed that, but
Okay.
yes, we'll look at that.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so going forward, I just want to take a step back and kind of introduce some challenges as well as some opportunities. But going forward, if you look at our contractual obligations as a whole, the budget has about $26.7 million in contractual obligations, over a budget of about 46 million, which is, over 57%. And the import behind that is, aside from long-range planning against these numbers, they're hard to move.
Right.
I'm not saying they're impossible, and actually, I would say the terminal leave number for this year is at risk next year.
That was
Right,
what?
because it's at risk next year. I mean,
More
to the extent that we have particularly police retirements, terminal leave will go up. So if you look at the next page, we talk about this a little bit, just because I know we're all interested in, I keep on forgetting to do that, huh? I know we're all interested in unfunded liabilities. So this year, as I said earlier, we have 11 confirmed retirements that will cost us this year $420,000. Next year, the same 11 will cost us $271,000, and the year after it'll cost us, about $100,000. So it's a total of $791,000 in terminal leave for these 11 confirmed. We also have a trust fund that we have not used. So this $420,000 this year is in the budget. We've budgeted for it, right? So we've left the trust fund alone. So this is like saving up, right, for if we get more hits on this, in this
Right,
area.
well, we might have some unanticipated retirements.
Yes, right.
Okay.
Did you have something to add to that? Oh, okay, no, that's okay.
Roberta, could you just back up one slide for a second, please?
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to point out, and it's more of an editorial than anything else, but just to show how broken the health insurance system in this country is, our health insurance premium exceeds the entire cost of the fire department, and certainly pretty close to the police department cost just for health insurance.
Yeah, that's right.
But just,
I'm sorry. But to be fair, unlike other municipalities, we are absorbing more of the increase than is the case of other municipalities because we have frozen the contribution level in prior collective bargaining agreements for some reason, while everybody else is paying 1.5% of their salary or 35% of the premium, and as the premium rises, we all share the pain and suffering. A disproportionate percentage of that is falling on the taxpayers because we have frozen the contribution level, which will not be the case in future collective bargaining agreements.
Steve, of that 5.9 million, in terms of total lives on the policies, what's the ratio of current employees versus retired employees, approximately?
I don't know the head counts, I know dollar-wise. The active premium bill, the gross amount's about $330,000 a month, and the retirees about $238,000 a month.
238 versus 330?
About 335,
Paying
give
almost
or
as
take.
much for retired personnel.
Yeah. That's gross, so that doesn't include the employee contributions. I think, off the top of my head, it's probably about $360,000
Right.
that we
Did
collect.
retirees contribute at all once they retired to their health?
No, just the small, the old contracts that were out where the employee pays whatever they're paying when they retire, and it's really very small. It's like
Minimal, right.
$480 a year.
Thanks.
And I think we all know, too, that the terminal leave policy has to be looked at. We can't be paying at today's rate for a sick day not taken at a lesser rate many years or several years ago, so that when somebody leaves, it's equivalent of a large severance payment on the way out the door, and that policy has to be looked at. I mean, that's just not affordable.
And just so everybody understands what, so Darius and the members of the public understand what terminal leave is, it's something that's foreign to those of us in the private sector, in that if you don't use your sick day, you get paid out for it when you leave, when you retire from government. In the private sector, if you don't use your sick days, they go away. They're there in case you're sick, in case your family's sick. In government, for some reason, people actually get paid for them. And that puts a tremendous burden on municipal governments like ours. I know the law has changed for new hires, right? I think it's like a $15,000 cap.
Yes.
But it's something that still we're facing in the years going forward.
It's those days, it's comp days for those that are eligible for comp days. Yeah.
Yeah, the comp policy right now doesn't seem to discriminate effectively between salaried and non-salaried, and that has to be clarified.
Actually, the management team is meeting tomorrow to talk through the new Human Resources Manual, but the big topic is comp and how we do comp across the organization. So, we'll have more of a general understanding.
And I just want to let you know, I did leave that on the dais for you. Please review that prior to the 23rd, our work session, because that will be discussed on the 23rd, okay?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. So talking about going forward again, I think that, even when I was on the Finance Advisory Committee, and I think, Mac is still here. Yes, you're still here. I think we've been tweaking the budget a bit year over year. I think the team has done a really good job in trying to bring the numbers down. But I think at this point, there's not a lot of fat left on the bone. So I think that's something that we have to address through structural change. So I think getting back to Albert's point, we have to look at salaries and steps and longevity, and we have to use the 2% cap as a tool going forward. And I think we have to start now, because there's a lead time in this. We have to start now towards doing government differently. So we're talking about, delivering services differently, treating people in the organization differently, and treating clients, meaning our residents, differently. And from a delivering services standpoint, we're talking about collaboration with the county, we're talking about collaboration with other municipalities, we're talking about potential insourcing and outsourcing, we're talking about perhaps using a Six Sigma kind of productivity tool in the organization so that we are not only more effective, but we're more customer friendly. On the people side, we need to empower the staff, and we need to really focus on staff and leadership development as well as on succession planning. And that's something we really need to work on. And on the client side, we have to measure somehow client satisfaction. I get clients that call me that are happy. I get some clients that call me that are not happy. But it's really anecdotal at some level. And it's hard to really gauge total client satisfaction and, what their critical customer requirements are, so that once we learn those, we can, in fact, change the process to deliver a better product to the client in a more effective, efficient way, and make them happier. So I just want to touch on this. We touched on this earlier. The council directive was $3 million. We take your point, Tom. We're going to take a look at this. We're approaching it. We haven't quite got there yet, but we will come back on Monday. So I just want to go back and say that, just to emphasize again, this is preliminary. And we still have to, work on some of the numbers. I think it's a lot of information. That's my second point, and it's the beginning of the decision phase for us. And again, we'd like to hear from the public as well on these issues. And I think it's also our opportunity, or the beginning of our process of a longer-term conversation and plans for delivering services better. So
Great.
That's really all I have to say.
Well, let me just thank you. I just have 3 points to make. First of all, let me thank you. You've been on the job now full 3 weeks. But I know you've been working through this budget for the better part of 2 years, actually, as a member of the Tiger team and then as a finance advisory team. I want to thank you, Steve, Heather. You did a lot of the legwork on this originally, and all the department heads. I know you guys have worked really hard on this. It's not easy. It's not easy governing these days. It's not easy budgeting for government these days. There are a lot of constraints on us, and I really appreciate it. I know I've heard from Roberta, and I've seen it firsthand. We've all seen it. The spirit of cooperation, everyone's sort of pitching in and trying to do the right thing.
So that was going to be my ending remark, but I ditto everything you said, and I have to say that it has been a pleasure the last week dealing with the staff, their honesty and their candor and the thoughtfulness that they put into this process, Heather's guidance. I have to thank also the Finance Advisory Committee, because they've been there for us in a very positive way. So I ditto your comments.
Yeah, that's great. And the second thing I want to say is you did give us a lot of information, and we appreciate it. It's very well organized. I think we have a lot to sort of work through over the next few days, and come Monday prepared to make some decisions. But the third thing, and the most exciting thing about this presentation, and I know we're focused on the 2014 budget, and understandably so, is this slide, they're doing things differently. To me, I mean, your point is well taken, no more fat on the bone, as you said. We need some structural changes. And, second point you made on that was, we have to look at compensation and salaries and all that differently, and use, whether it's interest arbitration cap or anything, as a tool to sort of get to where we need to go. And in this third section, which I really love, about delivering service differently, treating the people, the staff here differently, developing them, and client satisfaction, focusing, recognizing that the residents that live here, deserve to be treated as customers. They're paying for a government, and we got to give them the services they deserve. And so I want to thank you, and I particularly like this one. This is great. So thank you.
I'd like to just have a specific question, then I have a comment. On the page that says unfunded liabilities,
yes,
and it ends with trust fund, $479,000. What is that trust fund item again? I didn't follow that.
Well, it's money that we have put aside that we can use for future retirements.
In a specific trust fund for that purpose? Is that?
That's correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so there is a trust fund against which we charge comp time? Is that what it's for?
Well, if somebody retires during the year, yes. If they are entitled to compensatory time, vacation time, and their sick time, whatever the calculation there is, say somebody retires next month, there's funds in place to meet that obligation.
But the good news behind this budget is the 11 confirmed retirements that we have are against the budget. They're not against this trust fund. So we left this trust fund whole.
And the source of income into that trust fund is?
Basically, every year, we try to put some funds in from our prior year budget. That's how we fund the trust fund.
So it's sort of like the beginnings of the reserve, so the unfunded liability someday might be a funded liability.
That's correct. And you can also raise funds in your current year budget to replenish that trust fund as well. This particular budget doesn't have an extra, say, $100,000 or $150,000 to put into the trust fund this year.
So we have not added to this trust fund, but we haven't taken away from it yet either.
I see. Okay, thank you. It's helpful. Okay. And I want to join the mayor in thanking the Financial Advisory Committee. They helped us look at the budgets that the department heads prepared in a somewhat different format. Mac Hyatt, who's here, member of the Financial Advisory Committee, he in particular contributed his talents. He attended all the budget meetings, from the preliminary meetings through the meetings with the department heads, and made a huge contribution, with no compensation from the village, and I think we're all grateful to that. I think the department heads also were very, very professional. I think they understand what we're up against in trying to see if we can keep the tax increase to, zero, because we've had some pretty heavy increases in the past, and I think it's, if we can do that for a couple of years in a row while looking at things differently, it will make for a better use of that $50 million of which we are the custodians every year. We have to find a way to spend, give or take, $50 million in the most effective way possible, and we're headed in that direction. So that's, I'm grateful to the department heads, to the Financial Advisory Committee in particular. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, just Steve, I know you put a ton of work into this, and thank you, and Roberta also. This is a great format. Those nights of looking at those spreadsheets that give us all a headache, we could have probably bypassed all of that and just got to this, because this is easy to understand, easy for the public to understand. Like this moving forward, it's really simplifies. I want to say it dumbs it down, but it certainly does do that, and it gives us a better sense of concentrating on specific areas instead of micromanaging the line 27 on a spreadsheet.
Right.
So this is great. Thanks. And Steve, I know that there's people behind you that help you also too, and they don't obviously get a lot of thank you, but thank you to all your staff too.
And Steve's been great. I mean, he's been here early in the morning. We know he needs a lot of coffee to stay with us through the day, 7 o'clock in the morning, at night. So
yeah, job well done.
Yeah, thanks.
And of course, Dylan, right? Dylan working on the PowerPoint.
Oh, well, yeah. How can I? Dylan's worked on this on this presentation. He was in and out, ran over to Smashburger today, ran back, ran out, ran back, and doing this up to the last minute. So thank you, Dylan.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and I guess motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Public comment? Do we do public comment?
Do public comment again. There's nobody here from the
We
public.
did it at the beginning.
Okay.
Mike is there.
And also,
Mr.
yeah,
Seaton is there?
I'm not, there's too public here, I don't know.
Mac, Mike, anybody?
Okay. Thanks.
And Albert seconded?
I did second
Okay,
it.
okay. All in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.